In this video, we're going to quickly install a Docassemble server on a AWS or Amazon Web Service Lightsail server. So a few sort of jargon out of the way. AWS, which is Amazon Web Services, it's essentially a cloud provider. If you've heard of the cloud is just someone else's computer. In this case, it's Amazon's computer and their computing centers. Lightsail is one of the services, one of the many services that AWS offers. And in this case, we're going to choose it since it allows us to set up quickly set up a Docassemble server without having to make too many complicated choices, and sort of makes our lives a little bit quicker and simpler. And a few and then the yeah, and we'll sort of go through a bit more jargon as we go along. We'll be following this tutorial on the Suffolk Lit Lab Legal Tech class, which will provide this link as well. So the first thing we want to do is actually choose the domain name we want to use. So a domain name is the name of the website that you always go to, or name of the website you go to. Google.com is a domain name. apps.dev.suffolklitlab.org is a domain name, and all those other things. So we're going to want to choose one. Specifically, we'll want to choose a subdomain. So in this case, suffolklitlab.org is a top-level domain. We want to choose a subdomain since it makes it just a little bit more flexible of a setup, and it leaves your top-level domain. It can make it a little more friendly to everyone who's visiting your website. You can change the front end or the first page of your website to be whatever you want, and have your Docassemble server on your subdomain. So we're going to choose a new subdomain on the suffolklitlab.org. And in this case, since I'm recording this for the assembly line bootcamp, we're going to use the domain bcamp for bootcamp. So now we'll just jot that down. Take note of what you're going to use, because you will use it in a lot of different places. The next thing you'll want to do is actually sign up for an AWS account on Amazon. There's a link for that in the instructions, and there are also plenty of other sort of links to walk you through. And once you have an AWS account, you can go to the management console. So console.aws.amazon.com/console. And once you're there, you'll sort of see this general screen. And the first thing you'll want to do is make the Lightsail instance. So there are two ways we'll be navigating among the many different AWS services that exist. We'll be using a few of them. And you can get to them two ways. You can click on this large drop down where you can have some sort of recently visited services, or all of the services. They're always a bit much. So if you know what you're looking for, you can search instead. So we'll search Lightsail. And you can see we come up with Lightsail. And so the first thing we'll want to do, you can see we have some existing instances. You won't see those, but you will see this orange create button, or create instance button. We'll go ahead and click that. So one thing you'll want to notice, let's go back a bit. One thing you'll want to notice, which you'll see on this Amazon or the management console as well, is the region that you're in. There are a lot of different regions. So there are a lot of different regions. Generally you'll want to choose all of your services. You have to choose a region for, since essentially that's where that service will live in that particular computing center's location. There are a few things you should consider. Obviously, you consider a region close to where a lot of your users will be. If they're closer, then sort of the response times for your server will be faster for those users, and so it'll be a better experience. You also might have to consider some servers that aren't in U.S. jurisdiction if it's required by the data privacy laws in your country. So just keep those two things in mind. In this case, we'll be sticking with U.S. East 1, which we'll sometimes say Virginia instead. So let's go back to Lightsail and create instance one more time. So in this case, it defaulted us to Ohio. or just go ahead and click to Virginia instead. It's for US East 1. So we'll now sort of pick what's actually going to run on Lightsail. So we'll be running on Linux. Linux specifically, we will choose Ubuntu, which is just a good solid distribution of Linux, the latest version of Ubuntu server. And sort of this is the plan, is the one, or this instance plan, is the one place we'll have to choose a sort of computation spec or specification for our Docassemble server. And we'll want to choose the memory, or based by memory, and we'll want to choose 4 gigabytes of memory. You can run a Docassemble without or with less than 4, but it's a bit risky, and you might need to use a swap file if you're sort of aware of that, what that term might means. If you're not, no worries, 4 should be good enough. If you have a lot of developers writing interviews at the same time, or you plan on having a large amount of users, you might want to bump up to 8 gigabytes. But on our experience, 4 serves us well. So at this point, we'll want to identify our instance. So we'll, again, like we said at the beginning, we're going to make a domain called bcamp.suffolklitlab.org. Now that we have our bcamp, we'll go ahead and create instance. And boom. So it might take a little bit, or a few seconds, for your server to sort of go from pending to actually running. But while that's happening, we'll make what's called a static IP. So on this top level sort of tabs, we'll click networking and we'll click create static IP. So a static an IP address is a so an IP address is how machines or how computers are identified on the internet. If you ever, anytime you Zoom or anything else, your computers are really exchanging IP addresses and sending data back and forth between them. In this case, we want a static IP address. So static IP address is just something that all of the rest of the internet can go to this one place and they'll see where your Docassemble server is. If you don't have a static IP address, then sometimes your IP address will just, Amazon will just change it randomly. And you don't necessarily want that, so we'll go ahead and make a not static one. So if you had noticed, I clicked a little too soon, and wasn't the Amazon couldn't find anything for me to attach it to. So we'll go back to the same page again. Click create static IP address. We'll want the location to match again, Virginia. Good. We'll attach to our instance, which is bcamp at Suffolk Lit Lab. And we have to give it a name. We'll give it a descriptive name, which is the same domain name as before. So litlab.org-IP. So we just know that this is the IP address of that, or of our Docassemble server. And we'll click create. Now we have an IP address. People can find us on the internet. Things are going well. The one last thing we need to do while we're in Lightsail is we need to enable HTTPS. HTTPS stands for, it's a difficult one, Hypertext Transfer Protocol Security, or secure. BS is security. So essentially, most websites on the internet now run with HTTPS. They make sure that your users' passwords are always safe and secure when they're logging onto your system, and it makes sure makes sure that no one can snoop and sort of find out any of your users' information while they're on your website, which is always just a good thing. So we'll click on our instance and go click on networking again. Remember, this is going to be different. You can't just click on networking here because we won't have the right. This is sort of a misleading menu. It's not the menu we want to go. We want to first click on the instance and then networking. Once we're here, scroll down to where we see IPv4 firewall. We want to add a rule, and we want to add a HTTPS web server rule. We can leave all the defaults, click this green create button, and we now have HTTP setup, or HTTPS setup. It's very easy. We also have it set up for IPv6, which is just another version, sort of a future version for internet addresses. And that is all we'll have to do for that for now is all we'll have to do set up for Lightsail. At this point, what you'll want to do is actually go to your domain name service. So this is where there are a lot of different options. You could have this is where a lot of different options. You could be using any given number of domain name servers. There's Namecheap, there's Google Domains, AWS has their own name server setup. I believe it's called Route 53. But yeah, so there are just a lot of options. And specifically what you'll want to do is you'll want to create, you might have to search some specific instructions for your name server. But you'll want, or domain server. But specifically what you'll want to do is you'll want to copy this public IP address, this IPv4 address, which will be 4 numbers separated by dots. You'll want to copy that, and you'll want to make an A record. An A record with your subdomain. If you have your domain set up, your top level domain set up already, you'll just want the subdomain. So in our case, we're going to use bcamp, and we're going to make an A record with that IPv4 address. Doing this off screen, we're doing this off screen for us. Then you'll also want to go down and copy this IPv6 address, and you'll want to make a quadruple A record, which is just for the same thing, but just for IPv6. So you'll want to create those 2 records. Now, those records will take a while to propagate. It generally takes about 30 minutes, maybe a few hours, maybe, and if you're unlucky, a few days for your domain name changes to propagate all the way through. So no worries if you aren't able to access your website, your Docassemble server right away. So once we have our domain name server, or DNS entry set up correctly, we're going to want to go back to Amazon. So let's go ahead and go back to our management console. And now we're going to set up an S3 bucket. S3 is sort of secure, scalable storage. And it will hold all of the data for our Docassemble server. It'll hold the files that users download. It'll hold user information in the databases as they come up. And so it'll hold a lot of things. And so we'll have to make one. So let's go ahead and create. So you'll want to, again, search S3. Go to the console. When you click on the create bucket, we'll then go to bcamp, or we'll then name the bucket. It's going to be the same name as your DNS name, the same one we're using everywhere. So bcamp. It's in the same region, Virginia. Good. And we'll want to make sure that block all public access is still selected. Don't want to deselect that. And all these other settings can also remain the same. Then you'll want to create your bucket. After that, it should be easy as that. You have your bucket. It's created. And access should read bucket and objects are not public, which will help protect the privacy of your users. No one can sort of snoop around and just go straight to the S3 bucket to get information on your users. At this point, however, something has to have access to the bucket. This is where Amazon's IAM service comes in handy, which stands for Identity and Access Management. So search IAM, and you'll end up at the Identity and Access Management page, or dashboard. And so what we'll want to do is we'll want to go to Access Management, users. At this point, we'll want to click Add Users, and we'll want to add a new user. In this username, we're going to select the same domain name we'd be using, so bcamp.suffolklab.org. We'll just want to add one. We want the access type of this user to be programmatic access, since the user is really going to be the Docassemble server. It's not going to be a person logging in or anything, so we don't want the AWS Management Console access. But we do want programmatic access. At this point, we're good. We can click Next and set permissions. So what we want to do is we want to attach an existing policy directly. We'll search S3 since we're trying to access our S3 bucket, and we can sort of just check Amazon S3 full access. That's what we want. We don't have to modify any tags. We can click on to review, make sure the username is correct, the access type is correct, and the permission boundaries, that can be fine. Also, our managed policy of full access to S3 is also good. So we're going to create user. So now we have our access key and the secret access key. At this point, I'm going to pause the share. But what you'll want to do is copy both of these pieces of information into just a separate thing. So off screen, I'm copying these things into just a text document. That will then come back and use later. There we go. So those are copied. And at this point, our Lightsail, all of the sort of Amazon part of our Lightsail setup is ready, all done and ready, which is great. So what we need to do next is actually get on the Lightsail instance itself and start running and actually install the Docassemble server on it. So to do that, we're gonna use what's known as SSH, or secure shell, to just directly connect to this this Lightsail instance and install Docassemble. So if you go back to Lightsail and you click on our instance, bcamp, you can scroll down and you'll see right here, the user on SSH client is, if you really want to, you can connect using the browser-based SSH client, which I believe that pops up in another screen, so you might not be able to see it right now, but it pops up it'll pop up in its own screen, and you can use Amazon's SSH client there. However, it's a little bit easier if you use your own. And so if we're going to go ahead and use our own. So you want to click on the account page. You'll see that we have SSH keys for our different regions. This is our account. And so we're, again, working in Virginia. We'll download this key. And now that it's downloaded, we'll connect to it. So I'm going to stop my screen share, and I'm going to start it on my terminal window, which I am personally using Linux. If you are on Windows or another system, you'll have some different, you'll probably have some different settings to go through. I believe Amazon should have directions for accessing with the PuTTY client, which will be a bit different than what we've got here. But the broad bases are the same. Once we get connected to our Lightsail instance, the instructions will be identical. So the only thing here that we'll need to do is we'll need to run sudo chmod to change the permissions on our file. I downloaded mine directly to downloads, and it's called Lightsail default key. So we'll change that, the change the permissions on that file to 600. And then we'll actually run SSH. So SSH-I followed by the path to your Lightsail key. And then at this point, you'll want to type Ubuntu, since that's the username of the instance that we're connecting to. All of the Ubuntu instances have the username Ubuntu, and the public IP address, which, if you remember correctly, was the last thing that we saw on our page. We'll go ahead and copy that. This is just my computer telling me this is the first time you've talked to this other computer. Are you sure it's the right one? I am sure, so I'm going to say yes. And now we're connected. That was relatively easy. So at this point, we'll want to start making a few updates to the server. So we'll first run sudo apt update, which will look for any new versions of packages and sort of the software on the server that we want to update. You generally want to keep your servers up to date, since when they are, they're more secure, less likely to have security bugs that people can exploit. And as you can see, there are 178 packages that need to be upgraded. Let's upgrade them. So we'll run sudo apt upgrade -u-y. And this will sort of upgrade all of these packages without asking us about each individual ones. And as you can see, it's installing a few new packages, and it's also installing or updating all of these existing packages. So this process can take a little while. While it's happening, though, we're going to set up the next part of, or the next thing we'll need to end up doing. So what I'm doing is simply open up a blank document. And if you're following along the instructions, what we'll need is a env.list or an environment list. And sort of what this is sort of a list of all of the secrets that we need, or that our Docassemble server will need to access when it's running. It's important that you keep a copy of this keep a copy of this file on your computer, and sort of keep it as private as you can. Don't share it around, obviously, since it'll have a lot of essentially passwords for your computer to access, or for people to access things. But specifically, you do need to keep a copy, since if something goes wrong with your Lightsail server, then you need to have a copy of this, and so you can always recreate it. Because if not, you will have to recreate a lot of those services we just created. So there are, this is sort of a predefined env.list that we had, but we'll sort of set a few of the things that we need to set. DA hostname will simply be our DNS name, so bandcamp suffolk.org. S3 enable true, since we want to use S3, and you can also set the S3 bucket to your. You can also set the S3 bucket to your DNS name. Get it away. So at this point, you'll want. Remember earlier when we copied over our S3 access key and our secret access key, you'll want to copy those back here now. I'm not going to do this on screen. I'll do this, pause the screen share, and do this later. Our S3 region, we're sticking with region 3, US East 1, which was Virginia. Time zone, you'll want to be the time zone of where your server is. Use Let's Encrypt to be true. And you'll also want to give Let's Encrypt, which Let's Encrypt handles the HTTPS credentials. And so if you need to update them ever, Let's Encrypt will let you know. Which you'll definitely want to, because if your HTTPS is not up to date, your users will see a really big warning that says, this site could be evil. And in some cases, the browser just might not let your users go to your site more. So you definitely always want to keep your HTTPS stuff up to date when you can. So at this point, I'm going to pause the share. I'm going to go and copy my access key and secret access key into those two spots. making sure that no one looks over my shoulder to see them. When I've got that, I'm going to save it as env.list. And I will then cancel out. And now I have my env list. Let's go and check up and see how our Lightsail server is doing. Look at that. Everything is updated. That is good. At this point, we'll now actually want to install Docker, which is this actual process that our Docassemble is using to run. So we'll want to run apt install docker.io. It's going to ask us if we do want to install it. It's telling us the exact packages that are going to be installed. In this case, we do want them all, since we do want Docker. So we'll again sort of have to wait for these to install. It shouldn't take too long this time. And we're here. And so at this point, we have to do a little bit of Linux finagling. But what we're going to do is we're going to add this account, so the Ubuntu account, to the Docker group, which just lets us run Docassemble through Docker without having to deal with some strange permissions. So we're going to type sudo usermod - lowercase a capital G Docker, and you can directly type $user. In this case, we know our user's name is Ubuntu. We could type that as well. And next we type new grp, which is new group Docker. And that's all we need to do. So at this point, we need to make a file. Here, we need to essentially copy that env list that we just made into here. So let's do nano env.list, which sort of gives us a text editor that can run in the terminal with the actual information we want. So again, I'm going to pause the screen share since I don't want to have anyone look over the shoulder at the secrets, the S3 secrets I made. But what you can do is you can copy the text from your computer. You can click the right. You can generally right-click your mouse and click paste to actually copy-paste the information. And at that point, you can Control O, Control X. O, Control X. And then that will save your env list. And so now we can see, using ls, you can see that we have a file called env list with all the information that we need. Apologies for a bit of that break. So at this point, we should now be able to see we have a file, env.list, in our on our server that we've copied all of our secrets and information from. So now at this point, we just actually want to run Docassemble. So this next command is a bit of a doozy. It's a bit long. I would suggest you copy it, but I'm going to go ahead and type it out. So docker run -d is detached, so in the background. We'll want to pass these ports along. These ports sort of allow Docassemble to talk to the outside world through Docker. We'll always want to restart if something goes wrong. So we have a server that's up and it's just not down. And then we want to pass this env file to the file that we just named, env.list. And then we want to name the actual Docker server service we want to run, which in this case is jhpile, Jonathan Pyle, creator of Docassemble, who hosts the Docassemble Docker instance. A mouthful. So once we have our command there, we'll click click go, and it will take a little bit. So this first part will be sort of Docker downloading Docassemble and starting it to go ready. It will, the speed of how long it's going to take depends on what you're doing. The speed on how long it takes might depend on just internet access and a few various other things. But once you've got it, we'll wait a few minutes for this to sort of finish downloading. And then when we do, or when it is finished downloading, we'll have to sit for a few more minutes to wait for Docassemble, for the Docassemble server to actually start. But once all those things are good, we should just be able to visit our Docassemble server at the website we've made and log in. So let's wait a little bit for that. So, welcome back. It's been, on my side, it's been about 5 or 6 minutes. It took most of that time was Docker downloading the image. But once it did that, you can see it kicks you back to the sort of terminal window to type a little bit more. If you're always curious to see what's happening, you can type Dr. PS, which will sort of show you the status of all of the Docker images that you're running. In this case, you can see that Docassemble has been running for about 2 minutes, which is a good enough time for it to actually come up and load everything. So I'm going to go ahead and click Stop Share on the terminal window. And instead, we're going to directly connect to our new Docassemble server. So we can actually connect. So bcamp.suffolklitlab.org works. It's pretty nice. If in case yours doesn't work, you can always use this direct IP address. That's on the Lightsail site. You can always use that as well. And so what you'll do is you'll type that. You missed a bit of you might have to go through a few screens that just say this connection is not secure. And again, you'll only really have to do that if DNS isn't working for some reason, which again, it might take 15 or 30 minutes or 30 minutes to an hour. In this case, it took a little bit for me to walk through these steps and for wait things. So that by the time everything gets settled, you should be also settled as well. So yeah, now once you're at the Docassemble server, there are a few things that you'll want to do. So the first thing you'll want to do is actually sign up. So on all Docassemble servers, the sort of initial email is admin@admin.com, and the password is, what would you guess it? Password. And so you'll sign in. Obviously, that is a very insecure combination of password and username. So we're going to want to make a new password, make it secure. Generally, you'll want to use a password manager for things like this. But we'll go ahead and just sort of make a new password. And now you have your Docassemble interviews. Now, there are a few things that that will be useful and we might want to help set up help set up. The first thing, if you plan on using GitHub for any of your integration or for hosting your interviews, sort of making them open source or even not open source, and you just want another repository to save them, you'll have to go click on this top right corner, click on configuration, and scroll down to where it says GitHub. At that point, you'll go ahead and enter true instead of false with a capital T. And you'll also have to set up an OAuth GitHub application, which there are a bit more details about that in the in the Docassemble server, or sorry, in the Docassemble documentation as well. So we won't get into that too much. We'll go ahead and save. It will take a bit to restart. But the second thing you'll have to do is actually install some packages. So a great way to install some packages is go to the Suffolk Lit Lab. We have a number of great packages. We'll first want to install, so if you go to any GitHub address, you want to just copy the URL of that GitHub. In this case, we're going from GitHub. We want the latest and greatest. You can also install packages directly from a zip file if you want to install packages that you've developed locally and haven't stored on GitHub or anywhere else. Or you can install a package that's publicly available on PyPy, which is the Python package repository. In this case, we'll just go with GitHub. You'll know you type the GitHub a branch correctly when you it'll auto-populate these selections for your branch. And you can click Update. In this case, there are a few other GitHub. In this case, there are a few other GitHub packages that we'll want to install. One of them is the assembly line wizard. We'll also want to install AL Massachusetts. In your case, you're likely will have a different jurisdiction. And if you go to some of our previous boot camp videos, we walk through how to make a jurisdiction, repo from our separate from our AL general jurisdiction. And then we'll also want the AL toolbox. And so we should be, as you can see, our package installed correctly, which is great. And so let's go ahead and install these other packages as well. It'll take a little bit of time to install each one, but when we do, everything will work pretty great. Go ahead and pause now, and I'll pick back up whenever I have all of these packages installed. So now, a few minutes later, as you can see, we've got our Docassemble AL Massachusetts, AL Toolbox, assembly line wizard, and the Docassemble mass access package. Some of these are organization specific. Mass access is organization specific to the Court Forms Online project and sort of the mass access project. The AL Massachusetts will be your jurisdictional specific package, but the rest of these you'll generally want to have. In our last final steps to sort of make sure things work, we can go to the playground. Let's go ahead and actually just, so out of our playground, we'll go to folders, packages, and then we'll go ahead and pull from the wizard package, which will just help us actually read GitHub. Something was up there, sorry. But yeah, essentially once, go ahead and pull the wizard package into our playground, which you won't have to do to run, but just sort of as an example to make sure we have everything installed correctly. Wait this little last bit of time to restart the playground to run correctly. And now we've got it. We'll go ahead, go back, go to our PDF tester. And there are a few packages that we did not have installed. And this one is particular, docx to Python. So we can go back to package management. Let's go ahead. And this one is a PyPy package. So we know that simply because it's not like if it's we know that because most of the packages you'll install will be PyPy packages. You'll want to sort of use the more stable version of the packages. For the for the assembly line, most of our packages are available on GitHub. We have them also available on PyPy, but for sort of the bleeding edge version, that's as new as you can get. You'll want it from GitHub in this case. But in this case, we know that the docx2 Python package is on PyPy, so we'll go ahead and wait for this one to update as well. And whenever it does, we'll be able to go back to our playground and get things running. So it's just a few seconds of waiting time there, but now we're back at our PDF field tester. And we're here. You now have a running Docassemble server. There are a lot of different configurations and settings you can check, and I highly recommend you check out the Docassemble documentation directly for that. There's an entire page on installation. There's an entire another page on configurations of your server and setting a lot of different things, including Google API keys for your Google Maps auto-filling addresses for your users, and also GitHub configuration. There's a lot of stuff out there, so I recommend you look into it all. But at this point, you now have your own Docassemble server being hosted on AWS. Congratulations.